I'm here today with my partner and owner of Elite Fitness, the gym I used to own for 7 years, Kevin DeHaven.
What's up, guys?
And today we were just gonna do a couple of interview style questions. Nothing's been scripted. We're just going straight off the bat. So Kevin, how many years have you been coming to this gym for?
I've been coming to this gym 20 to 22 years. We used to drive up here from Charlotte when I first moved to North Carolina, and I've been living in Huntersville for 20 years. So 20 solid years, and used to visit it prior to that as well.
And you know, a lot of people say that training intensity is different these days than it used to be. Can you say that within this gym even you can notice that?
Yeah, unfortunately, even here we noticed it. I think there's still some people here that train a little more intensely than a lot of other gyms that I've visited, but I think that is probably the number one thing lacking in people's training these days.
What do you think about all these, how should I even put it? It's nearly like diets going fads, isn't it? For a while you have the keto diet, then you have if it fits your macros. It seems to go in like a never-ending rotation. Where do you fall in all of this?
I usually start people off with a real basic, like 40% protein, 35 to 40% carbs, and the rest being fat. And from there, I adjust it. I know it's a little different than what you do. Usually you cut out all the carbs, get somebody real lean. So I usually like to give them a little food to eat, and then I start chipping away at that, adjust the cardio. But as you know, I mean, any well laid out program that is truly followed will yield some very positive results. So it'll work if the clients want to follow it.
So Kevin, these days, it's nearly like people who don't want to use really strong drugs are stigmatized. I myself made a post the other day where I was actually publicly attacked because I don't promote the use of DNP, which is essentially rat poison. I talked about this in my video yesterday, can make women infertile. I do not promote that use at all. Where do you fall on the stand?
I think for a woman that is a horrible idea. I think you and I have both always been very conservative when it comes to supplementation. I think people's health and longevity is much more important. I think a man can get away with a lot more than a woman, and with a woman you need to be very careful. I've known women over the years that have competed at the highest level, got their pro cards, chased their pro cards for years, and completely destroyed their bodies from taking too much T3. DNP wasn't a thing back then in a couple cases I'm actually referencing in my head right now. But tons of T3, not near enough food, tons of cardio. They achieved their goal, and for the next 3 or 4 years, they've got metabolic syndrome and they're destroyed. It's just not worth it.
Do you think it's really that people look at the short-term goals and they don't look at the long-term goals? And when I say that, I mentioned yesterday, it just felt like I was 19 yesterday. I was getting ready for the World Championships in powerlifting, where I won the overall as a teenager. But now I literally just turned 34 2 days ago, and it went by like that.
34?
So what would you say, Kevin, to these men and women who are in their early 20s and all they're thinking about is the overall, the pro card, this year, next year?
What I would say to them is, obviously we live in a society now that everybody wants what they want it right now. Instant gratification. When it comes to this, when it comes to training, building muscle, dropping body fat, whether it's to be competitive on a stage or whether just for personal goals or for some other type of sport, slow and steady always wins the race. I mean, it takes time. And I think people have a lot of bad information, or they get a lot of bad information. And I think everybody's in such a hurry that they're willing to do things that probably risk their health, and that is not real smart. Again, I think what I would suggest people do is slow down a little bit, make sure your diet is on point, make sure your training is on point, and then you can start introducing some other things.
Everybody knows that you are good friends with Jay Cutler. I mean, I'm looking at a picture of him up on the wall right there where he came and visited this gym a few years ago, and for the past few years, pretty much every year he's come and worked out here. Where did yours and Jay Cutler's relationship start?
Jay and I became friends when he first came to guest post the North Carolina State Championship here, probably in, I think it was '99. He was actually a little tighter with one of the guys I worked with at ISS Research. 6 months later, a year later, we had signed him at ISS Research. He He then went on to win the Night of the Champions, which it was, now it's called the New York Pro, but back then it was the Night of the Champions. And then he went on to get second place to Ronnie back in 2001, which was awesome, by the way. We had a very low staff out there at the Olympia, but I was sitting in the crowd and that was exciting. But he worked for us for another year or so, and from that point on he went on to Muscle Tech. We stayed in contact. I always travel out to see him in Vegas, or we try to meet each other or meet up on the road if we're traveling. And then he came and worked for us at BPI Sports. Oh, I'm not great with time, but 2014 maybe. No, it's probably before that, maybe 2012. That lasted for another 4 or so years, but we've just always remained really good friends. If I don't hear from him, I'll reach out to him. If he doesn't hear from me, he reaches out to me. But that's a good, solid dude right there, Jay Cutler, for sure.
It's very interesting. I've seen how you train, and in some ways it's similar to how Jay Cutler trains, with the more ballistic repetitions where you're really focusing on a very hard contraction, perhaps a little less focus on the negative. Have you always trained like that, or is that something that you've adapted over the years to suit your own body?
I think the most about training I've ever learned is from two people. One was a guy, Al, rest his soul, he's passed away. He owned Flex Gym in Virginia Beach. And I remember when I first started training with him, I had the opportunity to train with him a handful of times. He really showed me how to engage the muscle and really contract the muscle and stretch. When I started training with Jay, I learned about pace, stepping up the pace, and volume. Matter of fact, in this gym about 20 years ago, I trained arms with Jay and almost threw up. And I was also fortunate in the very beginning of my training, because I really didn't get started training until I was about 26. I had a friend who I went to high school with who was pretty serious about his training, and he was pulling all the routines out of like Flex magazine, which obviously was a tremendous amount of sets, and it was some serious hardcore training, and that's what we were following. So that's where I got my base, and then I learned a bunch from Al as far as how to contract the muscle, and then Jay with some pace. And then over the years, I've learned, because I have torn a rotator cuff and I've had some injuries, that if you're hurt, you can't train. So I've adjusted my training style to make sure I can still lift as heavy as possible, but safely, right? There's no guarantees, but I try to do it as safely as possible, make sure I'm good and warmed up, really pick up the pace. And I've been able to train pretty much injury-free for the last 10 years. So it's kind of all evolved over time, but definitely the intensity is the one thing that I've never lost, regardless of whether I'm doing 24 sets or 12 sets. If the intensity is there and I'm taking things to failure, doing some drop sets, supersets, I think that's what's kind of kept me going for as long as I've been rolling now.
And that's really something I learned from you myself, because once I hit about 30 and I had various injuries, I realized I couldn't keep always training the way I was training, deadlifting 7 plates aside, week in, week out for sets of 5 or 8. That's awesome, feels great. It's great for the ego, builds muscle really well, but it does take a strong toll on the joints. And as I've experienced myself over the last couple of years, nothing is worse than not being able to train. And I don't mean just physically, but I mean psychologically, and it affects all aspects of life. So let's jump back. Kevin, you bought Elite Fitness after probably thinking about buying this gym for literally decades. And you bought this gym, and come December, you took it over. And then, what happened? Coronavirus happened. What is your experience of being a gym owner thus far, without even taking coronavirus into account? We'll pretend that's not even a factor.
A gym owner is a tough gig. Fortunately, like you and I have discussed before, I didn't buy the gym from you just because I wanted to say I was a gym owner. I knew that would be a bad decision, bad business decision. And I've made some really good business decisions over my career and my lifetime. I've made some bad ones, but I was already generating revenue here through training people and through doing the diets and the nutrition. And my office has been in the back. Cornelius has been nice enough that when we first started DECON, we kind of worked something out where I have an office in the back there. So I was here anyway. So to me, it made sense. But my experience thus far is it's tough, right? We're a small gym. We've got 5 gyms within about a 5-mile radius. There's a lot of people in this area, but fortunately or unfortunately, Elite Fitness has a stigma of being a little more hardcore. Which, when I have new people walk in the door, what I always tell them is, it's really not a bunch of bodybuilders, meatheads, and powerlifters in here. We do have some, But what we have is a lot of normal folks, right? But the people that do train here tend to train a little harder than in other places. So we actually got a great, as you know, clientele, really good members. There's not a gym in the United States of America that I've been to that has better gym etiquette. But as far as to get back to your point, I think your point anyway is it's tough. I mean, I'm not getting rich over here, that's for sure.
No.
And Corona ain't helping none.
Yeah, people, and there's a lot of little things that go on behind the scene, right? Like a toilet breaks, who's there to fix it?
Yep.
Has to be you.
Yep.
Unless you have employees that do it for you. So it's tough.
I'm in here every day doing little things, emptying the humidifiers, making sure everything's vacuumed and mopped. When we get to a point, when we get back to open it up and we got some more personal training going, I get some more membership. Hopefully I can hire somebody to do that stuff. But as Cornelius knows, right now, guess who does it?
So Kevin's not really as vocal about this topic as I am. Anyone who follows me on Instagram realizes how vocal I am about bad coaching, and that basically coaches acting like doctors, which they're not, which I've said over and over and over. And Kevin has seen a lot of these really bad programs laid out for athletes, not as so much a suggestion, but rather a requirement for them to be the athlete underneath this coach. So Kevin, what do you think about these coaches that are just saying you must take these illegal, illicit drugs?
I think it's terrible. I think it's irresponsible. I think it shows no skill whatsoever, none. And I'm not as vocal as Cornelius, but I mean, if anybody's followed my Instagram, I go on my little rants when I see stuff that just really pisses me off. But it's pathetic, and part of the problem is simply, I got into coaching. It was kind of intuitively, right? I had somebody help me. I did a lot of research on nutrition. I was fortunate to train with some really top guys back in the day. I started to compete. I started to learn things. I came to this gym. I met people. I started helping them with their diet. And then one of my friends in particular was like, hey man, you should start charging people for this. I'm like, you think? He's like, yeah, you got me in the shape of my life. So it evolved over time, right? I had a couple shows under my belt. I had years of training. In time, I started looking at it as a business, right? These people today, they do one or two shows, or maybe one show, or maybe no shows, and they think they're a coach, right? And the thing that bothers me probably more than anything else, because it's free, anybody can do whatever they want, right? One of the beautiful things about America, we can all go out and do what we want for the most part, as long as it's within the law. But what I usually see is a coach say, here's 800 calories, here's 2 hours of cardio, and here's a ton of drugs. And I tell people to run. Run. That requires no skill, zero skill. I had a trainer, a guy I trained him for a show, and he kind of wanted to do his own thing, and he had a pretty successful team for a while. I don't know how he's doing now. I hope he's doing great. But he came in here and trained with me one day, and we did 5 sets of hamstrings, and the guy was toast.
I was here.
He was destroyed. I'm like, what's the problem? And I saw some of his protocols, and it was 3 stalks of asparagus, 1 rice cake, and 2 ounces of fish. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not really. And it was lots of drugs and lots of cardio. And I'm like, that requires no skill at all. So yeah, there's a lot of terrible coaching out there. I mean, men and women, but women specifically, you gotta be smart. You are your own boss. You make your own decisions. So if something doesn't look or sound right to you, please reach out to some other people, get some other people with some experience's opinion, and don't make some really, really bad decisions that are gonna affect you for the rest of your life, for the next 3 or 4 years, or whatever the case may be.
Kevin, if a coach sends you an email and he says, check-in pictures look good, but from now on, could you send them all in the nude because I can't see your physique correctly? It sounds like a joke, but I've heard of at least 3, and that's at least 3 coaches that do that.
Yeah, I don't, run. Look, that's not professional. It's again irresponsible, but again, you as the client have the final say on what's okay with you and what's not. So I can't put it all on the coaches, although I think it's horrible and they need to be punched in the face. Some of these guys, that's the kind of stuff they're going to ask for, and at that point you got to draw a real hard line and decide whether you want to move on to another coach or not.
What advice would you give to a female she's in good shape, she's never really weight trained before, but she wants to do a bikini show? Where should she begin?
Resistance training.
Yeah.
She needs to look, bikini isn't about muscle, but it's about tone and shape, right? It's mainly judged the lower body, as we know, but if you've never done any resistance training, and even though you're fairly lean and everything's soft and the muscles aren't pushing, that's going to be a problem. So resistance training. Look, I say this all the time, there's CrossFit. Every time you turn around, there's a new fad. Some of them will last, most of them will not. What will always be here, and what has been here since the beginning, is resistance training with weights.
You know what always confuses me, Kevin, is exactly what you just said. Bikini doesn't require a whole ton of muscle. Yes, you need to have that certain shape. But what about these coaches that are making girls do basically body weight circuit routines where they're doing duck squats and just all this body weight stuff, and then giving them drugs such as Anavar on top, which is an anabolic steroid, which is made to help you recover from harder training?
I mean, you can incorporate some of that stuff into the resistance training, but again, I think it all starts with the resistance training. I mean, you got to build some muscle. If you don't have any muscle, you got to build some. You can do some banded stuff and some walking lunges and some box squats or box jumps or whatever it is you want to do, but without some weight and some real resistance behind it, the results are going to be limited for sure.
Would you say there are any women out there that naturally could not build enough muscle to compete in bikini without any drugs?
No, bikini you should be all right. Some of the other divisions maybe not, but bikini you should be okay if you want to put in the work. Now, is it going to take 4 months or is it going to take 2 years or a year and a half? I don't know. It'll depend on the individual, but sure, I think naturally someone can get ready for a bikini show without the use of drugs.
Yeah, but you'd rather wait a year, do a show, end it healthily, than do it in 6 months, end with a deep voice and some other side effects.
You would think.
You would think, but not everybody is like that. That's for sure. So Kevin, we talked about you promoting shows before. What was the first show you ever promoted, and why did you promote that show?
I was given an opportunity from the current chairman at the time in North Carolina, Mike Valentino. I had asked him a few times about a show. It's hard to get a show. He gave me an opportunity in October of 2009. I think he gave me the opportunity earlier in the year, obviously, but October 2009 was my very first show. I held it in Charlotte at the McGlowan Theater. At the time, I remember I had 94 competitors, which doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but for a first-time show, it was really good. There were 720 seats. We sold that out. It was an unbelievable show, actually. Really enjoyed that. From there, I got another show in North Carolina, then working with Trey Bennett in South Carolina, who is now the chairman for North and South Carolina. I got another show, and then I was able to gain a show up in Virginia about 6 years ago with Jay Cutler. That's the Jay Cutler Classic in Richmond, Virginia. And then I got another little show here in South Carolina that just passed. It was the one and only show in the Carolinas this year thus far with this COVID-19 situation. But it's been interesting. There's been peaks and valleys, right? It's definitely cyclic as far as, the number of competitors and people being into it, maybe not being into it. Bodybuilding has fallen off a good bit because a lot of people are going to men's physique or classic physique. If you took all those people and it was still bodybuilding, it'd probably be the same number, but with the other divisions, it's really broke up the numbers. And then now we've got the wellness division this year, which I think if we can get back to promoting shows with this health problem, this pandemic, we'll see. I think that could be a really strong division in years to come. So hopefully the shows start growing again like they did. I think they hit their height, I would say, probably in, for me anyway, 2017 maybe. I had as many as 320 bodies one year at the Mid-Atlantic Classic in Charlotte, and the year before that I had 270. So there's a couple years where we're getting really good numbers, and then it's kind of slowly been falling off ever since. It's still steady, but it's been falling off.
So let me ask you this, Kevin. So obviously we're both NPC judges. You solely work with the NPC. However, you have, as well as I have, noticed that the quality of the professionals that are going to the next level, to the pro stage, are lower than they used to be. Now, of course, you can say it's because they give out far fewer pro cards, which is true, far more pro cards, pardon me, these days than they did. Back in the day, you had to win the overall at a national show to get a pro card. You got one. Now it's like sometimes top 2 in a class. Sometimes it's one of the top 2 won it in an older division, it moves up a place, so even a 3rd place gets it.
Yeah.
But with that said, like you said, there are so many more divisions now. Why do you think overall the quality seems to be a little diluted?
I think mainly because of the divisions, right? I mean, if you look at like classic physique where a guy has to hit a weight limit, you know, they're getting in better and better shape. So in bodybuilding, there's just fewer people doing it. I think it goes back to some of the things that we've already talked about where, you know, people aren't putting in the 10 years of hardcore training in the gym and diet. I mean, you know, people like Jay, people like Don Long, people like Kevin Lebroni, people that I had been around when I first got started, they were machines when it came to their food as well as animals in the gym. And they did this day in and day out. I mean, I can speak about Don and Jay specifically. There was no off season, you know what I mean? Yeah. They might have eaten a few more calories, but these guys weren't eating pizzas and burgers and fries. They stayed on their diet 24/7, 365, maybe with a little meal here and there. But I think that's what's lacking today as far as the nutrition and also, I believe, the training intensity. I'm not trying to dog out any of these current guys because some guys train really hard.
Some guys really do.
Some do. There's no question about it. But then I think it's you know, too many drugs and too much supplementation. So the muscles are getting bigger and fuller, but they're not getting that real hard, dense look, and they're not getting the separation that we used to see back in the 90s and early 2000s.
Put it this way, when I hear somebody say, yeah, I have to stop my workout short because the pumps in my low back from the drugs I'm taking were so much I couldn't finish the workout, to me that just makes it sound like those drugs have become counterproductive to the entire process.
Yeah, we hear that a lot too.
It's just a very common thing. So Kevin, with this new wellness division coming out, what do you honestly think you're going to see? I believe on the local level you're going to see a lot of bikini girls which aren't quite in the shape that they should be to be competitive in bikini, saying, well, you know, my legs are a little bigger because generally, you know, the more estrogen you have, the more fat you hold in your legs. So I think on the local level the standard may be fairly low.
I mean, it's too early to tell because we don't have any shows going on right now. The show that I had March 14th, honestly, we had 3 girls and they looked pretty good. They really did. The top 2 girls and even the girl, there was 2 classes, so there was 2 girls in 1 class. But all 3 of them looked good, and the 2 in particular looked really good. So now on a national level, they probably needed more legs, more glutes, more hams. The upper bodies were fine, but I think they need to be a little bit bigger, lower body to do well at the national level. But again, I haven't seen anything yet, so it's really hard to say. All we've seen is, you know, some stuff from the end of last year and overseas and a few shows in like California and whatnot this year. So we'll have to see. But I think you could see some not so great quality at the local level to start with, for sure. But that's usually the way it starts anyway.
You know, something, Kevin, I was always curious about. With men's physique, they wear board shorts. Now, they've had a division in another federation, which I won't name because we are only for the NPC and the IFBB.
That's right.
But there are other federations where they wear these very short, tight shorts where you can see the leg still in full. And then, I'm not sure if it was, which federation it was, but I saw a Middle Eastern contest where they were all wearing jeans. Now, to me, it would make more sense to wear jeans if you were basically having an upper body contest. Where did this whole idea of wearing board, I understand you want to look like you look really great on the beach in the summer, but it always feels a little strange to me to be wearing board shorts on a stage like that instead of, let's say, jeans or short shorts that show leg development.
You know, I think they've talked about maybe raising the length of the shorts up a little bit, but I don't know who came up with that. I would assume Mr. Jim Mannion did. I mean, he's come up with some fantastic ideas over the years with some of these divisions. I remember when he came out with figure, it just blew up, and then bikini, and now men's physique, and the classic physique. So I think things are always evolving. I'm not in on those meetings at that level with the NPC. I just hear what I hear from, you know, the people I'm connected with, like some of the local chairmen. But you know, I'm not sure where it came from, but it's been super successful. So I don't know where it's going to go from here. I don't know if they're going to raise the shorts up a little bit or not. But again, you can't argue with the success it's had thus far.
No, you cannot. So let me ask you something, Kevin. They introduced women's physique because they were saying women's bodybuilding was getting a little too masculine. Who's to say? I mean, that's a personal opinion. What is too masculine, what isn't too masculine? Honestly, for the average guy, a lot of bikini girls are too muscular because most men are so insecure about their own bodies that even the slightest sign of muscle on a girl would be too much for them. But you've noticed how the standard of the Olympia for the physique ladies have gone up, up, up. They're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now they just, I heard, brought back bodybuilding to, so how is that going to work, Kevin? How are they going to have this higher level of physique and bodybuilding? How are they going to do?
You know, that might be, and again, I don't know, this is speculation on my part, but that might be a way of bringing women's physique back down a little bit to what they originally envisioned it being, you know? And there are still a lot of women bodybuilders out there, and it does have its fans. So maybe there's enough of demand of a demand that they went ahead and they're willing to give it another go.
Yeah.
But I think that what might happen is you might see some of the top level women's physique girls get a little bit smaller and not quite as hard, which again is I think what they were envisioning to begin with.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And with classic, would you say that classic is primarily a genetics contest? Because let's say myself, if my classic limit, I think it's like 100. I tried to get there once, I wasn't able to do it. It's like 185 pounds. One time in 2014 when you dieted me down, we did it totally naturally, dieted for months and months and months. I lost a lot of muscle on purpose because I was trying to get to middleweights, and I did do middleweights. And I won, and then I looked, I mean, I don't even think I looked like a bodybuilder, but I was super shredded. I was like an anatomy chart. I mean, everything was sunken in. But the reality is, for me to compete in the classic division, I couldn't really be much bigger than that. And that wouldn't stand a chance next to guys like, there's Keon, there are all these really great, really genetically gifted guys. So would you say that for the less genetically elite, such as maybe yourself and myself, we're middle of the road, we're not terrible by any means, but we're far from the genetic elite, that trying to go into classic is like trying to stick a square block into a circular hole?
Well, genetics play a part in everybody's potential, right? In every division. So I think at the higher level of classic physique, absolutely. I mean, you've got to have a certain level of genetics playing in your favor, or else you're probably, running uphill. For somebody who's not as genetically gifted and not as aesthetically pleasing, then I always think bodybuilding is the better route to go, because if you get in great condition, I think you can do well, right? And same thing in classic. I mean, at the lower level, if you're in really great condition, you might be able to push a guy out who has better genetics because he's not in as good a shape as you. But when you get to that next level, you got to have everything. So yeah, I think genetics play a huge role at the top level of classic, but it plays a huge role at the top level of every division.
Yeah. Would you say with bikini, would you say it is impossible to train a non-potential? If you don't have the structure to be a bikini pro, it's not like you can add a load of muscle and then become a bikini, and then build the structure. I'm kind of twisting my words a little bit, but you're given what you've got. So for those ladies, would they be better off maybe looking at developing some more leg muscle and doing wellness, or?
It could be. I mean, everybody's different. I mean, people come back here in the office all the time and they're like, I want to do this, and they're not anywhere near in shape. And I always tell them, as this process evolves, as you get leaner and leaner, we may see different things. We may say, hey, we thought bikini, but wow, you can do figure. You got some muscle, you're wide, you got good structure, or it might be the other way around. So we might come in and they want to do figure, and as they get leaner and leaner, we realize there's really not that much muscle. Structurally, they're at a disadvantage, right? Because the girls in figure these days really are wide. So it just depends. I mean, you don't really know. I mean, you got what you got. I agree 100%, but you don't really know what you got until you get all the fat off.
That's 100% the truth. And on that note, Kevin, that typical first timer, he comes in, he's maybe 240 pounds, he's bloated up on drugs, he's the biggest guy in his gym, he's a strong mofo. He lifts up his shirt, he's got, you see some abs there? You see some abs? I mean, and his arms are big, and his veins, his face is nice and bloated. He's 240 pounds, he says, yeah, Kevin, I want to do a show with you. I think I'm going to be like 225 on stage.
I laugh, usually, nicely, and go, look, man, we'll have to wait and see what you are. A lot of times, if you come in that kind of condition like what you're describing, it's nowhere near 225. We're looking at a light heavyweight more than likely. But again, until you go through the process and truly get in shape, the individual doesn't really know what they have. They may think they have a lot more than they do. And then some people, you know, they don't carry as much fat as they may have thought, and they don't have to drop 30 or 40 pounds. So everybody's different, but the typical bloated up, waterlogged, I'm 240, I can't really see any veins, and I only need to drop 15 pounds, I'm gonna be shredded. That usually doesn't happen.
Usually you can drop that in the first week of diet.
Yeah.
That's what I found. So Kevin, we've worked, you and I, we've owned DECON now since 2015, right at the start. There are a lot of clients that you work with, there's a lot of clients I work with, there's a lot of clients we work together with, and we're maybe even going to bring on a few coaches underneath ourselves. And when I say that, they will still be their own coaches. However, we will just be overseeing and making sure that the plans and everything are well designed, which I'm sure they will be, but that's something we've got coming in the future. With all the clients we've worked with, name two of the ones that surprise you the most. Now keep in mind, we've had a girl who went from amateur to pro to the Olympia stage. We've had a ton of people turn to pro. I mean, just for you, who kind of surprised you, Kevin?
Oh, it's a tough question. I have to think. Who do you think?
I always think, I remember it was, I think the year was 2015 or so, and there was a young man called Hunter who you used to work with all the time. He does CrossFit now, and he's freaking awesome at it. But he was just killing every teen show, just destroying it. And he had a little buddy called Kyle Puckett. And Kyle, what you say, he was this little guy, little Asian guy, and he was training with him, and it was like basically little brother, big brother kind of situation. And year by year, Kyle just has transformed into now what is a top level pro physique. Last year he missed his pro card by one place I should say, and that was because he was lacking some of the back thickness, which is now corrected. But when I just look at overall from where he started to where he's ended up, that's a pretty big change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I guess a better way for me to answer that question is I'm sitting here thinking about it. We've got a wall full of people there that have surprised me.
That's
you
true.
know, not any one name in particular that stands out, or they didn't, you know, win a national level show or something, but men and women that really stuck with this thing for a year, 2 years, and completely changed the way they looked. Those are the ones that I think really, it always surprises me when somebody has the commitment, discipline, and dedication long term.
Long term.
So I guess my answer to that question is I've got dozens, but not any one in particular.
And just on that note, that is something that coaches help develop. And that's something I keep preaching about. So when I first started working with Kyle 5 years ago or so, first year he was able to diet for 12 weeks, and then he had to go and do his own thing. He got big and fat in the off season. Next year he was able to diet for 16 weeks. Every year his level of discipline improved until this last year and a half, where even if it's the off season, even if there's no show in sight, every meal is weighed out, everything is perfect. He has the one cheat meal per week. I've talked about how I don't really like cheat meals, but this is a slightly different context. Just to give you an example. But his discipline and dedication has built over the years.
Well, and that goes back to some of the guys I referenced back in the day, like a Jay or a Donald or something, where I physically, or I saw with my own eyes that physically the training was on point, super high intensity, and the nutrition, it never wavered, you know? They might throw some berries into the oatmeal. Hell, I don't know if Don even did that. I love Jay did, but they might have added a few calories, but it was not burgers, it was not pizza, it was not fries, it was not junk.
It wasn't, I'm gonna miss 3 meals and then later I'm gonna eat a Domino's.
Yeah. I can remember one time I was with Don. He guest posed at a show, and he had his 8 ounces chicken breast in one container. He had a cup of rice in another container, and he had a cup of broccoli in another container. And he ate that, and his wife at the time had put a Cliff Bar, a chocolate chip Cliff Bar, they were brand new, put it in his bag. And he finished his food, and he opened it up, and he took a bite. Maybe, he might have taken 2 bites. I'm not even sure he took 2 bites. And I'm like, what are you eating, man? He goes, something my wife put in here. And he ended up giving it to me. He didn't even finish it. It just was out of the norm for him. He was used to being disciplined. These are the 3 things I eat. I heard a great podcast not too long ago that I mentioned on Instagram, but one professional bodybuilder had competed in a few years. He said, man, if I wanted to get on stage again, I would eat 6 foods, I'd take 6 drugs, and I'd fall in love with the cardio equipment again. And that's pretty much it, you know, that's what it takes. So Kyle is definitely one of those guys.
And when we preach about this, the reality is bodybuilding on the competitive level is not for everybody. It just isn't. So let's say if you've decided you want to do a show, then I say for that show, give it 100%, leave no stone unturned, follow the instructions, just bring your absolute best. You do it one time. If after that you're like, I hated every second of this I hated it all, then it's not, you don't have to keep going. There is no special reward at the end of the road. Even if you turn pro, unless you win the Mr. Olympia, there is no big end payout.
No big financial reward usually, yeah.
You and I have both been there with clients backstage at a pro level show, and these clients, they go out and maybe they don't make the top 15, and they basically get looked at for 20 seconds, and then they walk off, and that's like all year, all that work, and it's just gone like that. So if they didn't enjoy the majority, because no one enjoys everything all the time, but the majority of the process to that point, it'd be kind of a waste, wouldn't it?
I mean, I tell people all the time too, look, if you go through this process and you truly follow the plan and you end up getting ripped, shredded, shape your life, whatever, and you follow through, I said that is something that you can take with you in every area of your life for the rest of your life. The discipline and the dedication and the commitment that it took to get there. Now, it's not for everybody. And at the end of that, when you get up on stage and regardless of how you do, you come off and you're like, just wasn't worth it. Well, that's cool. I've only had a couple people do that. Most people get kind of hooked. And then the other thing I make sure to warn people about is once you do that, you're screwed. Because you're always going to compare yourself to the best you've ever looked.
You're always going to feel fat, no matter what. And that's what we deal with clients and even ourselves. Kevin will lift up the shirt and say, how's it looking, how's it looking? He's got a full 6-pack there. But because maybe there's a little bit more fat than what he'd have when he was on stage, it messes with him psychologically. That's why I talk a lot about the psychological part of bodybuilding, because to me, that honestly is the most important. That's why these coaches who are only giving out a drug plan and then psychologically abusing their clients, like calling them fat or lazy. I had that, Kevin, this client who had an if it fits your macros approach. She actually had a list of macros. It wasn't even per meal, it was per day. So it was like 150p, 120c, like 60f, and she was following it to the letter. But you know how food labels don't have to be completely accurate. At the end of the week, she hadn't made progress, so the coach called her out as being lazy, as just all these. I saw the email, all these different names. When the coach has no idea, maybe the client did weigh out every food, but the food labels were incorrect. That's the problem with if it fits your macros.
I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt for as long as I can before I call bullshit on it or whatever. But you know, people make fun of me sometimes for using my old Excel spreadsheet, right? But this is the thing. If you're eating 4.5 ounces or 6 ounces or 8 ounces of protein, I don't care what the label says, as long as you're eating 4.5 ounces, right? So maybe it is off from package to package. Maybe it is off from what you Googled yesterday.
And who knows?
It doesn't matter. Right. As long as the quantity of food is what it's supposed to be, then I can make the necessary adjustments to get you to where you need to go.
It's funny because I heard a little comment about the Excel sheet the other day from a coach who wrote a diet plan for a client that if you put into Google comes up on steroid.com as a sample diet. Just saying. Just saying.
Well, look, I tell people all the time it's a custom diet for them, but I had a client call me out one time going, well, I was talking to some of the other girls and the diet was kind of the same. I'm like, well, yeah, you got rice, egg whites, chicken, broccoli. I can't come up with some new foods for you, but the diet wasn't the same. You know, you had X amount of carbs, they had X amount of carbs, you had X amount of protein. It's different, but yes, the foods are similar.
The thing about it is, yes, we can eat healthier, but you'll see a lot of coaches who say things like, ooh, I add a tablespoon of red palm oil in every day, and that's keeping the cardiovascular system healthy. Meanwhile, the client is running horrendous amounts of drugs. In reality, that food is doing nothing but a placebo effect. So a lot of these new fads and these newest supplements that come out, trust me, I talk with a lot of people who have tried a lot of different supplement protocols. One of my friends is an Irish bodybuilder, and he's had some kidney issues, unfortunately, over the years. And for instance, he went out and he bought astragalus, and he used astragalus in various different levels of dosages, different brands. And if anything, he said it made his kidney values a little bit worse. Now, that's not to say it doesn't work for some people. I'm just saying there isn't a herb or a supplement or an oil or a food that can fix extreme damage like that. So be careful who you get to coach you. So Kevin, with this coronavirus, what does it look like for you for the rest of the year as far as shows go?
It's hard to say. I mean, look, we're all kind of in the same situation here. So some people have it way worse than me. Some people have it better than me. It's tough. The gym's closed down. Can't personal train. Got some online clients. I mean, we continue to work with them. But there are no shows right now. I mean, I'm hopeful. I have a show scheduled for June 27th. I have one for August 8th. I have one for October 24th. At this point, if I could get 2 of those to jump off, I'll be very, very happy. But it's too soon to tell. If they open this thing back up at the end of May, there's 6 weeks, there's 4 weeks. Give people enough time to get ready for the Victory Classic in Charlotte. I don't know. But look, this is, my good friend Joe Piscula has a huge show in South Carolina, the Border Clash. He had to cancel, and trust me, he's got a pro show with that. He had a lot of money invested. He had a lot of people who had entered. So it's across the board. It's just a tough situation, uncharted territory for us all. So what we need to do is just be a little nicer to each other, be a little more patient with each other, a little more tolerant, and just do our part and get through this thing, man. I'm sure we can get to the other side of it, and shows will continue at some point.
Without a doubt they will. And now just to be a little bit more controversial, because that's what people always like to hear, without naming any names, because we don't do that ever. So if you call yourself out based on something that I've posted up, that's your own fault. I never called you out. What is one of the craziest things you have seen either an athlete do or a coach prescribe?
I mean, just again, it's excessive amounts of drugs and no food and a tremendous amount of cardio. DNP for women, I think, is horrible. Trenbolone, any type of testosterone, D-ball, anything that's androgenic for women, I think is horrible. So, I've heard some crazy stories about stuff people do, but in general, I don't know that I can think of one particular case. There's just so many of the same kind of thing where it's just, again, super low deficit, tons of cardio, and we're gonna offset all of that with a bunch of drugs.
I heard it the other day from a fellow coach about a client that had hit him up for a consult, and her current coach, instead of changing food, instead of doing anything, he added 90 milligrams of trenbolone into her program each week, on top of the 150 milligrams of primabone she was taking. And she had no real idea about what any of these drugs were, so she said, why am I taking this? And his reply was, because you have the body type that needs it.
Let me say this to the ladies. Men can get away with all kinds of craziness, and they'll be okay. The ladies, as you get closer and closer to that masculine line, once you cross it, there's no coming back. None. So some are fine with that, and if they're fine with it, that's fine. I got no problem, right? But you've got to be careful. When you're creeping closer to that line. Once you've crossed it, it's over. You can't come back. It's done. Damage has been done. So that's why this is so important to make sure you're informed and educated and have realistic expectations as far as your goals are concerned.
So when you have a coach that says, this is an anavar pill, this is a supplement and has no side effects, do yourself a favor, Google. Everything your coach says to you, just go ahead and just give it a little Google. And I don't just mean pull up one research article that says DNP is a safe drug, like was posted the other day. There's one article, and then there's 10 that say the opposite, and there's countless deaths each year. And that's not to even say that's a tool that couldn't be utilized by a certain athlete in a certain situation if they wanted to. But it's not up to the coach to kind of push that like it's a harmless little fat burner. Oh, instead of here's your thermocuts, instead here's your DMP pill. Doesn't quite work like that. So Kevin, do you think you're going to get back on stage yourself this year? Or I know you were talking about it a little bit.
I don't know. We got to get all this other stuff underway. We got to get this gym up and running again, and get the shows going, and we'll see. I always try to stay in reasonable shape, so that if I decide to do that, I don't have to die for 12 or 16 weeks. But we'll see. Maybe one more time. Maybe.
Says that every year, huh?
It better happen sooner than later.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Kevin. I thought it was a good little interview. And now, in the name of the coronavirus, we'll elbow bump the end.